this on? Hello, everyone. If you could settle down in your seats, please, now, and we will begin this afternoon's session. So, thanks very much for attending. It's great to see a really good audience here today on this first full day in Davos. My name's Andrew Jack. I'm the education editor at the Financial Times, and it's been a great pleasure now for 3 years. We can cut the music, please. It's been a great... There we go. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to organise in partnership with Intent the Responsible Business Education Awards. So our premise is that if we're to really drive for sustainability and biodiversity and societal purpose in the world, then clearly business schools have an important role to play as those who are training the next generation of entrepreneurs, of managers, of executives, and others who will be key decision makers and pressure points for societal change. And as some of you may know, the FT, amongst other things, does a series of rankings attempting to assess the best places for MBAs, Masters in Management, and so on. And we've tried, as part of that process of ranking, to include some metrics that try to capture some of these issues around sustainability and purpose. But it's a very complex area, and it's one that we'll perhaps come back to a little bit later in this session. And therefore, the idea of these awards that we launched 3 years ago was to, in the meantime, or in parallel, create a slightly more qualitative way of assessing some of the most interesting and innovative approaches within business education that touch on academic researchers, on teachers and professors, on students and alumni, on business schools as institutions, and interactors with the world of employment as providers both of talent and of training and insights into organizations with which they interact. And so in a minute, I'm going to introduce 3 of our winners for this year, just to sort of explain the structure. We'll then have a short discussion, so you'll hear more about their particular approaches and insights. We're going to hear then briefly from one of last year's award winners to give a sense of continuity about what happens next. And then we're going to bring 2 more panelists, one a distinguished representative of business and another from a leading business school, to give their perspectives, to talk precisely about the trends, the pressures, the potential, but also the challenges of trying to integrate sustainability and societal purpose more generally into business education. And then you don't get away lightly after, because in our second half, over about an hour, so a little bit less, we're going to ask you in your tables to reflect a little bit on these issues and to come up with a few tangible suggestions. And then once we've done that, we'll unlock the doors and you can have some drinks and relax informally. But let's begin then by looking a little bit at this year's awards. And we change the categories a little bit each year to freshen it up and to try to touch on different categories. But one that we've done consistently is looking at the core research work of academics within business schools. But the idea is academic research in the fields that we're talking about of responsible business with impact. And by impact, I don't mean publication in an academic journal. I mean research that then engages with the world of practice and leads to some change in policy or implementation with business, with government, with non-profits. Then we're going to talk about schools systemically. This is a new category for this year. But we can talk about some of the individual aspects and projects and initiatives, but what we're trying to get to here is the idea of what is happening structurally, institutionally within business schools. And are there some really great examples of practice across all of their activities, in their research, in their teaching, in their engagement with students, in their own internal operations, in their connections with their wider community? Are there some ideas, some incentives, some metrics, some approaches that, again, could try to encourage best practice by others? And then the third one, key, of course, teaching. What sort of innovation is taking place around societal impact, around sustainability? This year, particularly with a focus on finance and sustainability, and what methods, approaches, tools are being done that deliver value and, again, might provide models for others. So we've got a series, I think we had some more slides, I don't know if they're here, with naming all the names, but if not, you'll see certainly in the magazines that you have here on the table, and also in, you can see online at ft.com/RBE for Responsible Business Education, you can see all of the different award winners. And rather than having a single winner for each category, we have 5 winners overall for each, and then a whole series of highly commendeds as well, all of which are really interesting, and you can see with most of them web links to follow up and provide further insight. But let me ask 3 of our winners now to join me on the stage. Maria Castillo, who's Director for Social and Environmental Impact at IESEG in France. David Pitt-Watson, who's a visiting fellow at Cambridge's Judge Business School in the UK, and Anna Stunzi, who's a researcher and lecturer at the University of St. Gallen. So please join us. As I say, each of you is one of 5, but all of you really fascinating and interesting innovations that you've been involved with, and perhaps amongst the ones that are most core to this whole discussion we're having about sustainability. I mean, maybe let me start with you, Anna. So we talked about academic research. Give us, please, a brief outline of what your research has been about.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm very glad to be here, and thanks a lot, of course, for being among the winners. So, in very short, I think most of you know that a substantial part of the Paris Agreement is that developed country parties provide support to developing country parties with financial resources for their mitigation and adaptation measures. And part of these numbers are very much contested, both because it's a bit too little money that actually flows, and it's also too little money that actually arrives where it should be. And what we did was we built a machine learning model, a classifier, that classifies coherently all bilateral climate finance that flew between countries from 2000 until 2019, which allows us to not just do all the basic work in a very coherent way, but also basically to identify the very special cases where maybe an expert should look at if this is really climate finance or not. And what we find is basically that the numbers are quite a bit lower than what they reported, as well as that some countries are very inconsistent. And in the end, it allows other actors in this field, be it NGOs, be it recipient countries, to have an access to this data and have a look of what is being reported and why.
So a really good sort of tool. Tell us a little bit about the reaction to it, or what the follow-up has been in terms of people using it, or your engagement with organizations.
Yeah, so the reaction was very positive. I think on the one hand, we had multiple countries or representatives of countries who say we could use such a model, because currently this reporting and the tagging and understanding of what climate finance is sometimes also very difficult. And on the other hand, I think simply the transparency that it provides basically brings everyone at the same table at eye level, right? We can speak about the same numbers, and hopefully this kind of adds to more trust that is a bit lacking at the current stage in the negotiations.
Okay, thanks. So, David, let's move to, if I get the right slide, let's move to teaching then, fundamental to business schools, of course. Tell us a little bit about your initiative.
Yes, well, this is, first of all, thank you very much for the award. Thanks also to Ellen Quigley. I teach this with Dr. Ellen Quigley. And really, I'm a finance practitioner by background, and it has always struck me that when we teach finance, the things we teach, they're not wrong, but they are down a very, very narrow rabbit hole indeed. And if we were to ask the big exam question, Andrew, which is, what is the purpose of finance and how do we get finance to fulfill its purpose better, then there's a whole load of other disciplines that we need to be thinking about. And by the way, it's when we talk about purpose, of course finance has to be there in order to relieve poverty. Of course we need finance for the green revolution. So how is it that we get a purposeful finance industry? And so it's challenging the students on that, and we present the evidence about has the finance industry become more efficient, and as many of you may know, there's evidence that we've had no real efficiency improvement in the finance industry, and maybe some of those things that we're teaching as shibboleths, when you actually get into the real world, are much, much more difficult. Maybe we need to think about the corporate governance role and all of those sorts of things, and think about we're taking the money of millions upon millions of people. It simply cannot be the case that we can do that blinded to the other critical things that are going on in the world, of which climate change is an obvious example.
Now, of course, not least in the US, where I'm now based, there's, as we know, this huge backlash, supposedly all this woke ESG activity and so on. I mean, what's the reaction like from your students when you teach the course?
So I would say that the students would certainly wish to reject it. And indeed, I also worry just a little bit that we've got ourselves in the wrong debate here, Andrew. This has to be about the finance industry doing its job properly in the first place. This is not some anti-woke debate about what it is that we're doing. It simply is the case that if we want to solve climate, we've got to get new investments into that. I'm also absolutely struck that if you ask the American people what they think about ESG investing, environment, social governance investing, most of them think it's a really terrible idea. If you ask them what they think about responsible investing, they think that's an absolutely terrific idea. So again, this is taking 30,000 feet. What's the purpose of finance? What are the disciplines that we need to get finance to do its job properly? That clearly embraces the big challenges that the world faces.
Okay, so we'll come back in our next bit of discussion to talk a bit more about these issues and the challenges of sort of scaling up. But Maria, let's talk a little bit now. So we're on to the Schools Award. So this is the first time that we've done this, and as I said, we've been trying to capture
debate at all levels of the organization, mostly at the leadership level, on how ambitious do we need to be. And so we engaged in discussions with our students, with our alumni, and that really kind of led to what we call today the Transition 2026 initiative, which focuses mostly on two key pillars. The first one is learning. So learning doesn't only happen in the classroom. It's not only what we teach to our students, but it's also in the conversations that our students have with professors. It's in any sort of interaction we have while we take a coffee. It's in the way we run our buildings, our campus. So that was really the whole idea of how can we be ambitious and how can we take a systemic approach. So what we're doing today is that in February 2023, we launched a mandatory training for all of our staff and professors. So it's 550 people that are going through an 18-month, 7-module training, which covers kind of the basics. We said, okay, we need to have a common understanding, common language, and common objectives. So some of those modules focus on climate, planetary boundaries, biodiversity, net zero. We have modules also on diversity, inclusion. We have an elective module, just like students, our staff can choose. So we have things like degrowth, neurodiversity, so really kind of opening the scope. And the critical phase of this training is happening actually as we speak, is the last two modules where we have service-focused workshops. It means that by the summer, all of our academic departments and all of our operational services will have dedicated roadmaps with specific objectives, KPIs, that we will then put together. And of course, these have to be coherent with the overall strategy of the school, but they can also question whether what we have set out as a strategy is good enough. So this is really, I think, the key transformational part of the school. So we want our faculty to be trained so that when we go and revisit, which is what we're doing in parallel, revisiting our courses, syllabus, programs, the way we teach, we can make sure that we are putting the right skills, the right content, the right competences in there. So basically, we're doing kind of a gap analysis. Okay, what do we teach today? What are the expectations from companies, from the changing context, and how do we make sure we are closing that gap? And it's been quite a challenge. It's been quite a process to go through that. But I think without that common understanding and also that sense of empowerment, we want everybody to be a part of this change. We can't really achieve those changes. And the second part, which is linked to the roadmaps, is everything related to our operations. So how do we make sure we are being ambitious in the reduction of our emissions? So we are talking about the international mobility with maybe, some of you know, it's 65% of most of business schools' emissions. And that's not that easy to tackle because we want our students to go abroad, open their minds, and yet that's our biggest source of emissions. So how do we go about that? How can we be innovative? What kind of things can we do? So it's really about just looking at the whole picture and then making sure students are engaged, making sure they have leadership opportunities to create engagement, organize events, and then also making sure that that translates into our research. So making sure we hire the right profiles, but also that we change what we expect from our professors. So we have, the typical research lists today that don't necessarily invite us to hire profiles that are not kind of typical business school profiles. So we're looking at creating our own sustainability research publication list so that we can hire those people who are not really the traditional profiles. And we have someone who we hired last year who's helping us really kind of disrupt that process. So really looking at the whole picture and then engaging with alumni, engaging with partners. We signed a partnership with B-Lab last year. We have the GRI in one of our masters. So really making sure we're reaching out to our ecosystem and being involved with everyone.
Yeah, one thing I thought was particularly striking is it was staff and operations and not just faculty, academics and students. And it's a really interesting development. But just to come back on one of your points, as you say, probably the biggest contributor to carbon for business schools is travel, academics to conferences, including here, or students, as you say, in and out. So how are you tackling that? Yeah.
So we are currently working on that, and we just launched a plan that will look at a shift in our partnerships. So it doesn't mean we're going to stop working with schools that are far away, but it means that we're going to create more opportunities for our students in what we call Zone 1 and Zone 2. So we divided the world in 5 zones, and that's mostly Europe. So opening more partnerships, more exchange opportunities in Europe or closer to Europe. And then those who want to go to Australia or other side of the world, they will still be able to do so, but it will become much more selective. So it's also creating incentives for students, right? So that's the main focus. We are also working on we don't know the name yet, like a mobility allowance where we say, okay, you have, 5 tons. I think other schools are doing this as well. And then throughout your 5 years at your school, well, you can choose how to allocate those tons of carbon and emission, but then you have to stay within those limits.
Which also, it's an interesting place in a business school to reflect, as we know, on the flaws of existing offset schemes, but also a thing to look at to try to develop more effective, valuable ones. So some really great projects. I'm going to come back to you all in our discussion in a few minutes, but let's just now take a pause, and we're going to go to here, because as I say, one category we didn't have this year, but of course is fundamental, is the primary output of business schools, the students. And we had an award last year around fairly recent alumni who were, as it were, walking the talk, continuing post-graduating, not joining one of the big usual suspect banks, consultants, investors, but actually creating startups. So I'm going to ask David Evan, who won last year, amongst others, for the student category. I think initially we've got a very short teaser film to talk a little bit about the next stage of their organization, and then I'll ask him to come up to talk. Can we show the film, please?
This industry of footwear, it's very archaic, very traditional. It's 13 billion synthetic pairs of shoe insoles that are produced in a linear way and discarded with no responsibility for the other product life cycle.
Oh, they're on high there. There's a bull there too, huh? Yeah. Keep an eye, keep on.
That's what I wanted to check.
Join us. Grab a mic. Yeah. So thanks, a little teaser there, and I think probably people can also see a fuller version of this video, can't they, if they'd like to afterwards. So just tell us a little bit more about your project first.
Yeah, well, is it working? Can you hear me? That's better? Yeah. There we go. Wow, quite the introduction. Thank you so much, especially to the VNS and Intent team for making this happen, and everybody behind the scenes. Maybe a little applause for them first and foremost, so thank you so much. Thank you also, of course, to Andre right here for making it happen. Now, right there. And Jean, somewhere in the back there, and the whole Intent team. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here, and thank you, Andrew, for inviting me also once again. Before I get started, it's quite funny, because according to the Financial Times ranking and the measurement of success for top business schools worldwide, really for all intents and purposes, I am actually a rating liability. And I would like to talk about that a little bit with you, Andrew, today. But maybe before we get started, I'm always a little bit nervous on stage. It's not really where I feel most comfortable. So in that sense, maybe if you would entertain me, if everybody could please stand up. It's just going to take 60 seconds. I promise. Thank you so much. I didn't expect this to be so easy, but thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna ask 3 very simple questions, just to illustrate my point. First question. Wow. Okay, so in the last year, so in the last 12 months, how many of you in this room have visited a hotel? If you have, please remain standing. If you have not visited the hotel, please feel free to sit down again. I think that's about 100%. Okay, very good, that was easy. For my second question, a bit more difficult. So in the last 12 months, in the last year, of all the people that have visited a hotel in the last year, those white foamy slippers that you get, those very comfortable, really comfortable slippers. For all the people that have worn those slippers or have used those slippers, please remain standing. For the people that have not used those slippers, please feel free to be seated. Okay. A lot of people have not used them. Okay, I'm very surprised. I think we'll have to double check that after. Now, for the $1.5 million question. So of all the people in the last 12 months that have visited a hotel and used these slippers, will the people that have actually not taken responsibility for the full product life cycle of this product, and at some point of this product, it has ended into the trash, please remain standing. If not, please be seated. All right. Nobody here is guilty. Thank you for illustrating the point. Thank you very much for the participation. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. So the point here is, of all the people here, we're at the SDG tents, we're in Davos, we're at the World Economic Forum, we're talking about these things, yet at the same time, we're so aware of this problem, but we are still using these slippers. And why is that? Why are we still using single-use plastic items with no regard for the end of product life cycle? Even us, why are we doing that? So, the simple answer why we're using hundreds of millions, if not billions of these products every year is very simple. It's that our systems are flawed. And in order to tackle these systems, we need to work together, and that's something we have done with Primal Souls, with the help of Andre, of course, of Intent, of I4N, and what we have created in the past year, so I'll get to the point. What we have created in the past year is the world's first fully circular hotel slippers. And they look kind of like that. So with the help of our entire team, we have created the world's first fully circular hotel slippers. Circular meaning we take full responsibility for the end of product life cycle. We do not throw them in the trash. They're CO2 negative in their production, and they contribute to the biodiversity of the cork oak forest that you saw before here in Portugal. So this is what we have achieved in the last year. We've also continued to work on our core product, which is the shoe insoles. But I think what's very central within our business is that we understand the limits of our business. So our mission is very clear. It's very measurable. It's very reportable. We want to reduce 1 million pairs of non-recyclable footwear items from our landfill by replacing them with 1 million fully recyclable primal soles and primal slippers. It's very simple, very clear. However, so we're very aware that even if we reach our mission, this is just a drop in the bucket, because every year still hundreds of millions of non-recyclable products are pushing it down, and the net nature balance for nature is still going to be very negative. So that brings me to my last point, and that's the indirect impact that we also wish to have, and that is to inspire the next generation of consumers to consume more responsible, producers to produce more responsible, and I think we've done that, and that's why was part of the reason why we won the award last year. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, is to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs, and that's really the reason why we're here. So thank you again for having me, and it's a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, David. I think I'll come back to you towards the audience session towards the end, and of course you're right that some of these sort of really interesting initiatives are very difficult to capture in rankings and ratings, and it's one of the tasks that we're going to ask you all here to reflect on in the second half of this session, although hopefully at least the recognition of the awards and the support you were able to get as a result of it also has helped provide some momentum and force for good, at least for your initiative, as well as you say, the wider demonstration effect perhaps for some of your fellow current and past students out of Bocconi and other business schools. But let me ask our three existing panelists to come back, and if I could ask them to join them on the stage, Francisco Veloso from INSEAD and Severin Schwan, the chairman of Roche, please, as well. So we're now going to perhaps tease out some of the issues and challenges as we start to think through one, and this is the question I'm also going to throw out to you later. One is, does this all matter? Should we be focusing in business schools around business education on sustainability, given all the complexities of the issue and the tensions? And then if so, what should be the response, both of business as recruiters and engagers with business schools, of the business schools themselves, and indeed with media, including the FT and rankings, reporting, and beyond, to try to drive a force for good. But Severin, perhaps I could begin with you. So I don't ask you to speak on behalf of either Roche or industry more generally, but clearly Roche is a huge investor, actually engages massively with universities, of course, through R&D in drug development, in clinical trials, and so on. And I suspect also, even for your non-scientific staff, recruiting MBAs and others, engaging for corporate training and so on. So give us a sense, what's the value? Do you feel those pressures for change? Do you see it's realistic and possible for employers to drive business schools to be doing a lot more around this area of sustainability and social purpose? Or is it a pipe dream? Is it impossible? Is it misaligned with what employers and investors still want?
It's a big question.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for having me. And I'm not an expert in business education, so you are obviously much closer to that topic. But to ground us a little bit, perhaps, first of all, because you said, what do we need in terms of our investors? I just took over a new role as chairman of the board of Roche. I've been CEO for 15 years of Roche. And we have quarterly financial investor meetings. We have roadshows. so many interactions, and as a CEO, you are, really in the limelight and in the front row in those interactions. I can tell you, I reflected on that. Over the last 15 years, I didn't get a single question on sustainability or social responsibility, anything of that kind. I mean, just to kind of ground us a little bit in some ways, I'm just telling you, as a CEO of an international company, we are a bit in a bubble here, right? If you go out to your investors, there's nothing, zero, not a single question I remember. I've reflected on that just recently. Not a single question. Can you imagine?
And those are
so we
supposed to
joined
be
some reportings and stuff, and we do talk about it, but I didn't get a single question. What I should also say, however, on the positive side, when I joined Roche 30 years ago, I joined as a trainee. I mean, I didn't even know how to write about sustainability, and this was a non-topic. It was literally a non-topic, and I think I was not alone, right? So when I made a choice for joining the company, it was about the people I met there. It was about career opportunities. I was very interested to go abroad. I mean, those were the criteria why I joined Roche, but it was not about sustainability. Now, that has dramatically changed. If you recruit people today, the younger generation talks about purpose, talks about how can we contribute to a better society. So it's really, if I reflect on it, it's really, I mean, you triggered my thinking now because you said investor, right? What are the needs, etc., and how does this reflect on our recruitment needs on business schools? There is a huge mismatch. The outside investors, they would not have asked me a single question, but I cannot remember a single interview which I had recently when recruiting people where they wouldn't talk about purpose, sustainability, and all those matters. It's still a huge gap. Anyway, what I'd say, what I feel is really, really important is that sustainability and everything which is related to that is not a kind of isolated topic on top of things. You talked about finance, for example. So I mean, I'm interested in people who know the respective tools, who have the right attitude, the leadership skills in finance to integrate sustainability topics in their work. I'm not interested in some kind of isolated department about sustainability, which, I don't know, doesn't add a lot of value, and then kind of 99% of the work we do, including financial matters, allocation of resources, etc., is kind of separate. So my plea would be, if I look to the business school representatives, to not make this a separate course or a separate technical skill, but integrate it in the respective core capabilities, be it of technical nature, like finance or marketing or any other function, but also very much in terms of leadership and management in more general terms.
And just coming back to your point, or maybe the bridge, as it were, between the investors who, as you say, weren't really interested in this stuff. What about the pressure on the board, or indeed now in your role as chairman of, for example, well, on the one hand, impact funds or other more specialist funds that might be looking for societal purpose alongside, and sorry, just to finish, and also, right. For example, we know there are these, civil society groups like the Access to Medicines Index and so on that obviously have pushed on access, but also sustainability. Do they have a point of leverage? Do you feel a growing pressure from them as well?
Right. Yeah, first of all, I should say Roche is insofar in a special situation as it is still family-owned, right? So our board and our company is controlled by the founding families. So in this sense, it's not representative, and we have a long tradition to be actually at the forefront of what we call sustainability today. We had certain programs in place when we didn't even know what sustainability was about. But what I was talking about was much more the investors, which the general investors, which we also have to take care of. There is. Access to medicines, obviously a very important area for us in terms of social impact. We have probably one of the biggest areas. A company like ours, who provides healthcare solutions, has. I mean, if our solutions are not getting to the patient, at the end of the day, it's pretty useless, right? And there is no societal value. So this is a key area. But then if you look at it, and if you look at, for example, the Access to Medicines Index, I have to say, it's a beginning. I don't want to be negative, but in reality, it's pretty useless. You cannot really compare companies. So I give you an example. At the very top of this index, you typically find companies who are in vaccines or who are in generics, for example, because they obviously approach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of patients, and they score very highly, right? So we had a debate with the Access to Medicines Index a couple of years ago to get oncology into the scope of this index, right? We were always at the bottom end. And the reason is that our product categories were considered as not kind of, how shall I say, worthy to make it on this index. So we had to fight that oncology, which was one of the key areas we have been investing in, makes it to that scope, right? So what I want to say is, I mean, you can immediately see how unreasonable this is, right? So if you are not a vaccine company, then access to medicines doesn't matter, kind of, or there's a huge bias in the index. Now, that has been corrected, but I could go on for another hour to talk about all other kind of stuff which doesn't matter. But at least there's a beginning. At least there's something we can build on. But what I'd like to say, it is in such an immature stage that it's basically useless for investors. I mean, they would not be able to say, I invest into Roche because they are 5 ranks up in this index, or I do not invest in Roche because they are not up in this index. This is the reality. Yeah. And they don't even ask me a question about it. So yeah, in some way there is a pressure because we build our own pressure within the company to make progress, and we look at those available indexes and we work with those company or rating agencies to improve the indexes. You know, what we feel we should improve. But the external pressure is zero.
Anna, sorry, did you want to come in? No, Francisco, let me just come to you a little bit now. So we've heard about the internal pressures from students. We've heard about certainly the employees that now Severin is recruiting. So and I should say congratulations, incidentally, also INSEAD was recognized at least a couple of times, I think, in this year's awards. So congratulations for that. But so how much are you feeling those pressures, and how are you responding now as a relatively new dean now to INSEAD, but experienced from Imperial and elsewhere before?
Well, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to be here. I think there are two or three aspects that I think are important. One, of course, is to think about, what are the pressures that come or don't come from the market. And as you were saying, when you talk to the new generations of students, it's beginning to be much more present. And and certainly when I talked to the incoming class of January here that's just started at INSEAD, I could not, remember one conversation that one way or another did not touch on purpose, sustainability. So that's the reality that we're seeing on the student side. Not all the students, and this is, as you were saying, there's a movement, and this is quite important for us to think and to consider. But the broader issue is that I do think that if we go back, certainly in the case of INSEAD, to our own mission, which is to bring, the people the ideas and the cultures together to prepare leaders that can drive transformation. And we think about what is the mission of transformation that we're expected to have in today's society. And if we don't have sustainability at the core of that, then we're not being true to our mission. So I think in some ways we need to think about our own mission and what that means today, and to drive that transformation and that change on the back of our own mission without having to wait from the external pressures. Now, that's not easy to do because, as we started to talk about incentives, you were talking about the financial side. You know, some of the incentives that we have in business schools are different. For example, promotions, recruitment, advancement is very highly governed by academic impact, and that's the baseline expectation. And if most academic impact is not driven by how some of these work that is being done by our academics has impact more broadly on society and on sustainability topics in particular, then of course the incentives are not aligned. And so there are important work to be done systemically to address these incentives, the barriers, and the things that we face to be able to drive this agenda that go beyond one individual school. And we've taken on some of that as well in terms of responsibility. For example, we've been one of the co-founders of the Business School for Climate Leadership. And why? Because we know and we understand that to drive some of this change, it cannot be INSEAD alone. It cannot be just Said, or it cannot be IESEG. It has to be done collectively. And this is one initiative that we push forward to say we overall have to mobilize to drive this change.
And that's sharing insights.
Exactly.
Lectures and so
Now,
on, yeah.
just a comment about the point that you made as well, which I think is quite important, which is the approach that we also did at INSEAD. As we reflected over the last few years as part of that responsibility, one important part of that has been to reflect on what does that mean, not just for the research, but in an important part to the education that we provide to our students. And the way that we approached that was to look at the entire curriculum and to say, we're going to embed sustainability across the curriculum. So last year, or about a year and a half ago, after an important journey, we voted on that as a community. And the vote is important because it brings internal legitimacy. It was discussed, it was debated, and it was decided. And this brings the movement. And that means for us, across the 14 core courses and the capstone project of our MBA. And this is important because, to your point that you were making, which is, this is not just one separate thing. This has to be percolate through the various elements. But at the same time, we also have to teach our students how to think about this together and how to think this in a way that drives action. And the capstone project is the element that does that, an important part of doing this. And this is part of the movement that we have to do and that we have to continue and to make more general.
So integration and the capstone project is really the fundamental continuing and next step really for INSEAD, yeah?
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, Anna, maybe you want to come back. Francisco was making that point about changing the incentive structures within academia to focus on applied research with impact. What's your reflection on that? How easy or difficult is it, and what needs to change in the whole structure of way academic recruitment, promotion, funding works, do you think?
Yeah, thank you for this question. If you allow me, I want to take one more minute to build on what you said, because I very much agree that we're in a bubble, but I also think we have to get out of this bubble, right? So I think it's super important that we actually educate these people that are going to ask the questions and challenge the boards and the companies. And I think we can do that both as academics as well as lecturers, as teachers. So I think when students see that research is really relevant, that we can invite policymakers now that will come and explain why models like the one we research on are really important, that gives them a feeling that this is not just something they have to learn for a course, but it's really something that is necessary. Second, I think if we teach the students the fundamentals, which comes not just within our disciplines, but really across all disciplines that we should be all aware about, they can ask these critical questions and they can think more holistically and they can bring up the topics that they need for the world they're going to live in. And then third, I think what is very important is that we give the students the tools to actually implement the projects themselves. So I think student-led initiatives are really, really important to support, be it when it comes to questions about the curriculum, what courses do they want, as well as then kind of just, it can be very small projects, and I can give 2 examples. So one is in St. Gallen, you have little steps that go up from the train station to the university, and students wanted to make climate change tangible. So what they did is, on each step, they show you the color of the deviation of the temperature from 1990. So it starts dark blue, and it becomes super red. And at the very top of the steps, there is only the question, are you hot? And it's a very, very simple way to show how climate change and global warming can be felt. And it's a student-led project that is really, really great, because everybody who walks up these steps will know what they talk about. And I think small things like this help students that go out in this world and are going to challenge the big companies, are going to work in these companies, or are going to found their own companies, that what they learn in the universities and in the business schools really, really matters.
I mean, that's a great example. I mean, just going back to, I think Maria made this point earlier, but again, from the incentive structure for academics themselves, though, how much of a barrier is there? We talked about what sort of journals you might get published in, what gets rewarded, which tends to be publication in a peer-reviewed journal, not dissemination or development of tools of the sort you've done. Do you see those as big blocks, or are you able to navigate through that to do research with impact?
I would say it's mixed, right? So I think if you manage to publish in a very good paper, and I have to say Malte Tötzke, who's there, is a co-author of this publication, and Florian Egli as well, who cannot be here today. So this is, of course, very rewarding. But then I think the translation, be it to policymakers or to students, is really rewarding too. And if you manage, and if you're able, and if the school or the university allows you to do that, and also supports you in using your research and showing it what you're doing, this really helps. Now, when it comes to the hiring, of course, sometimes the criteria that are being put forward, very bold, are not the same that then are applied. I think we're all aware of this, right? And I think there also many universities and business schools can still make quite some steps ahead. I think we need way more people. We need more money for chairs. We need maybe even collaborations with companies who fund such chairs, where it comes to what are the questions that we have to look at in research and then translate to business.
David, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but of course, so you're doing this really interesting course at Cambridge, but actually you and your colleague Ellen, neither of you are actually full-time academic professors in that business school. You're a professor of practice, effectively, right? And Ellen is a researcher in another faculty. So what does that say about still the challenges of embedding some of the sorts of courses and expertise that you're trying to be?
So I think it's important to be honest about that there's a problem here, Andrew. I don't know how many of you in the audience are familiar with Sumatra Ghoshal's essay. It's about 20 years old now. Bad management theories are destroying good management practices. It was the dean at London and then in India. And that we've tried to turn some business disciplines into physics. And in turning it into physics, that's great in terms of research, but it's not terribly clever in terms of scholarship, in terms of pulling everything together. It's really unhelpful in terms of practice. Do you know, when I went to business school, there were still some business schools, Harvard was one of them, who said, look, we only teach with the case study, because when you're in real life business, there isn't one discipline that is telling you that this is the way that you should do it. Now we've turned it into all of those disciplines. And of course, you need to publish in this journal, you need to publish in that journal. That's how you get hired. And I think we should be honest about the fact that that is quite an issue. And even if I was to go to David's point, to get into the FT rankings, do well with your PhDs, but have you actually had any business experience? Well, that's not measured. So I think, look, I've been really impressed by the other people on these panels. Are definitely more worthy than what it is that we've done. And there's lots of good stuff happening, but some of this is quite fundamentally baked, and we're going to have to work on this over quite a period of time. I think probably with lots of smaller initiatives making the difference rather than with some grand global plan.
Yes. Instead, I should say, in defense of physics, it's interesting, actually, academic physics is one of the rare areas where there is a huge amount of collaboration between faculties and institutions. And actually, they were very early in the whole idea of open source publication of science, and publish first and then iteratively peer review. So it's quite interesting, actually. It's been quite innovative in the academic model.
And I even wonder, I was thinking this coming up on the train, Andrew, I mean, these really great initiatives that we're hearing about, almost could the FT play a role, not just in doing one publication, but in saying, look, let's do a series of publications. I thought, what you were saying, I haven't seen that happen at any other business school. Absolutely fantastic. But could we do that at 20 business schools and so on and so forth? I wonder whether there'd be things that we could do there, just learning from one another.
Ideas very welcome. Maria, what are your reflections? So you've already done very well in terms of the first steps around this systematization. What do you see as the really outstanding barriers that need to be tackled both by you and your colleagues, but also by other schools trying to push in this direction?
I think, from what's been said here and from what was said earlier this morning, if some of you were in the room, we've been talking about this for so long now. I've been in this job, this is my 7th year. Let's get sustainability across all, not just sustainability course, but everywhere. Let's get partnerships, let's get research, and nothing is happening, very similar to what was discussed this morning. And I think now is a time for action. It's a time for solutions. So how do we as business schools make sure we educate our students? That's our core business, is what kind of learning our students get, competency, skills. But how do we make sure we also trigger change in our entire ecosystem? Because that can't happen if rankings aren't on board, if accreditations aren't on board, if companies do not value those skill sets. So we can't do this alone, but we can also become kind of activists in the field and help to drive the change. And I think that is critical. We need to be at a place of action right now. We talked this morning, the 1.5, that's history, right? If we don't start speeding up, taking unpopular decisions, it requires courage, it requires boldness. When our dean supported us with our training, I can tell you a lot of our faculty were not happy when they were told they were going to have to review their entire courses. They weren't happy, but they're doing it. Because we said, this is part of who we are. This is, if you want to be in this school, this is what you do. And this is mandatory, and it's going to be in your evaluations, and you're also going to get incentives for the way you do things. So it's time for action, it's time for solutions, it's time for courage in the decision-making that's taken at all levels. So rankings, accreditations, companies, associations, and cooperation, collaboration among business schools. I think that's really key today because there's so many networks like Prime and other networks that are great, but again, we are kind of stuck in this circle of discussion and great discourse, great narrative, and what we need is just to real action and make sure that we are getting our students into the market and having them really drive change within organizations.
Yes, and as Severin was saying, still a bit of a bubble, perhaps, of coalition of the willing versus opposed to the wider forces as well and the conflicting interests sometimes business schools and others are dealing with. So we're going to move into our final section, and I'm going to switch back to you in a second in the audience here, but let me then first ask effectively the same question as I'm going to ask to you all, which is, if you each had one recommendation. We've talked a lot about barriers, but we've talked about needs for change, and we've talked about incentives. So what would perhaps be for each of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Maria, move along, a one key recommendation that business schools and others in this ecosystem could think about to bring about more positive, responsible business education? What would you recommend to your peers?
That's a difficult question, but I think it's linked with what I said before. It's just the courage to take unpopular decisions, because you'll always have people that do not agree with some of your decisions, but if you think that's the right thing to do, then you should go forward and you should do it. So courage, boldness, it will take us a long way when we think about the future and not just the short term.
David?
So I think I would start with Maria and saying we need to do this. I think, and with boldness, but I think you will then start to come across quite a lot of hurdles, in particular in my field in finance, just what is the curriculum? And I think when you come across that, we need to be working together. By the way, as anyone that wants to know we're teaching at Cambridge, really happy to send you everything and to talk to you about it. But we need to start to think about what is the new curriculum that is a seriously responding to the obvious need to address sustainability. And I think actually if we do that, we would have not only would we address sustainability, we'd address a whole load of other problems as well.
Okay. Anna?
I would say go from the long-term strategy or vision to an action-oriented implementation and be very transparent about what does not work yet and celebrate what works.
Okay. Francisco?
I think I actually have a couple of things. One is on the role of role models. I think academia, especially on the journal side and the evaluations, works a lot by role models. And I think one thing we can and should be doing as leaders of business schools is to really promote those role models that are driving change, because that's one area that we can really make a difference through that. The other aspect, and this connects to the point that you're making about the action, is to also remind ourselves that we as business schools can have a huge impact through lifelong learning and through executive education. There's a thirst, a hunger for better knowledge, to better understand what can be done, what should be done. And we don't have to do that just through the degree education. I think we have the responsibility and the tools to also help a lot drive that immediate change to the programs that we put out there in terms of training the executives, and to do that in a way that's grounded in the sense of trying to disseminate what we know works and doesn't work, because there's also, as we know, in ratings and many other areas, a lot of greenwashing going on. And so that's also part of our responsibility when we have to do this. So those would be some of my contributions.
Okay, Severin.
Yeah, first of all, I should say I'm actually very optimistic. I think the energy, the power of this new generation, which is coming to the market, to the companies, has so much energy. So I trust on that energy. In some ways, at some point, this will result in positive change. I have no doubt about that. But if I look at it from a business education point of view, to facilitate that change, again, I'd come back to this point that it has to be fully, you used the word grounded, I like this word, grounded, or connected what is here today. Because if it's not an evolutionary kind of approach where you build on what is out there and what companies are doing, then there's no chance that you can trigger change, because it is seen as something esoteric which is not relevant, and then it will be isolated. So I think the trick would be to make it an integrated element of what we do already today, just do it better and in a more sustainable way, whatever the respective function or leadership course or whatever is affected.
Okay, thanks very much. So, and I should maybe just add my own, incidentally, from the point of view of the FT, and we've touched on the issue of rankings, but we have already and continue to reflect on metrics. The challenge is always, finding stuff that is rigorous and comparable and can't be gamed and is feasible for schools to provide and us to analyse. But for example, we've included over the past couple of years measures of on the operations side, schools' intentions and targets around net zero emissions and publicly disclosed carbon audits. And we've also been looking and giving some incentives for integration of sustainability into curricula, although how you measure that rigorously is still very much an open debate. The other two things with actually intense help that we're working on in this coming year is one, and David touched on the idea of caselets, is something that we've been developing a series on, which leverages topical issues and underlying FT coverage, but works with business school professors in sustainability and climate to then give them a pedagogical framework, if you like, with questions to actually provide topical relevant cases that students can discuss and debate. And we're also going to do a report looking at academic research and trying to track the extent to which some of these issues are being integrated. So to, again, try to incentivize more work in those areas. So there's a few ideas. We've got now 20 minutes over to you, perhaps on your tables or your near groups. I assume most people here would agree, but if you don't, by all means, raise it, whether these issues we've been discussing are important and should be increasingly integrated into business education. But what I would love is for you to come up with one suggestion or recommendation for each of the three forms of pressure, if you like. So for business schools themselves, for employers and companies as levers of change externally, and the media, a third one, including the FT. What could those three players do? What would be your one single recommendation that could help drive greater progress around responsible business education? So please sort of discuss amongst yourselves. At 3:30 strictly we'll cut that off, and I'll ask each of your tables just to contribute some ideas back before we move into a more informal session at about 4:45. But do please thank our great panel in the meantime. And discuss, please. Don't go. Okay, we're going to reconvene, please, for about 15 minutes. We'd love to hear your reflections. Thank you all for staying, and it sounds like there were some great conversations. Who might like to volunteer amongst the different tables with some of the recommendations and the reflections you've been discussing? Any volunteers? Otherwise, I'll have to cold call in business school style. Yes, please, there's one here. Do you have a microphone? Oops, sorry. That works, great. Perhaps I'll come round.
Thank you. So we here had a lot of recommendations for you. Alors, first, first on the school side, we talked about the tenure system, because that wasn't discussed into the panel, and the importance of changing that so that the incentives include sustainability. So we know it's hard, but we think it's going to be important. On the business front, we feel that there could be some ideas in terms of reverse mentoring, that the younger employees could also teach to the older one. It's happening in a lot of companies around tech. And why not on sustainability, given the trends that you mentioned, and also the importance of lifelong learning, and really embedded lifelong learning as not a choice in every company on sustainability. On the media front, we would suggest that there is more spotlight put on change makers and what trigger their desires for change at the school level. In a particular class with Professor X is where my idea come to then create my company. For entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, we feel that there is not enough stories of what success could look like if it was not about making money. So if you at the FT could put the spotlights on these successful people who have contributed to changing the world and how that started in the classroom, I think that would be very inspiring for all the students coming in. And finally, for the ranking, a little bit connected to that, to suggestion to add entrepreneurship in your ranking. I think we get the call here from the person. And also to consider alternative rankings, and maybe yours. There are some that were mentioned in France, for instance, the Change Now ranking, which is very focused on one geography, but making them worldwide one, when they focused on impact and sustainability.
Thank you.
That's what I have for you.
Very, very good. Thank you. Who else would like to? Yes, please. Would you mind passing it back? Thank you.
Good afternoon. So we came up with several approaches, and I'll start first with the message we wanted to share with the media. Financial Times, please don't take it too serious. But what we realized is that we have quite some hurdles to overcome, and I think this has been stated on stage just before. And what we also know is that the best algorithms and the best technique and the best scientific papers, they won't make it happen. What we need is some type of change management. You can call it lobbying, you can call it educating the general public, just to make sure that they buy into the necessary changes that we foresee. And for that, a newspaper like Financial Times, I mean, you shouldn't need a PhD to be able to read the article. We need the general public to be able to read and understand the news and to get the message, what is really required in terms of actionable items that can be done in order to foresee. And well, then switching into education, because maybe we have to even start earlier, education for people to be able and to be eager to consume this type of information and to make the change that we really need. And then we have one more point for company. I'll hand over to Pamela for that.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Pamela Kellert. There is one sustainable development goal that we haven't talked about yet, and that is gender equality. In my work, I work a lot with leaders to help them to create more diverse teams and to develop also more inclusive leadership style. You wouldn't believe how much of educational work is required there. So my ask to the representatives from education here is, how could you take more of that work into education to teach about the benefits of diversity, not just for really helping everyone to be part of it. We talked earlier even about not having a narrow view on finance. It even has a lot of financial benefits, as much as a lot of research has already shown. Already 1 in 2 people from Generation Z will not work for an organization that doesn't have diverse leadership. And if we talk about sustainability, we need to recognize that not having inclusive team leadership actually has really detrimental benefits. 40% of female engineers leave engineering for the rest of their lives because they're not finding inclusive environments. And we need that talent to reach all the other goals we have.
Okay, thanks very much. Who else would like to volunteer? Where should we try? Yeah, please, over here. Let me bring a microphone. Thanks.
So we talked a lot about how these things work together and not separately. So not the business schools in a separate way, the employers in a separate way, and the media in a separate way. So we talked about how these things play together and how these incentives are misaligned. So for example, and it's not an insult to you, in your rankings, the quantity of research is, if I recall correctly, the most important part. But the quantity doesn't make the quality, and it doesn't mean anything for the teaching style at universities. Then for employers, for example, what is the expectation of the employers to what the students need to know and be able to do? So if an employer needs, for example, as the chairman of Roche said, that, and then you come back to the business schools need to both have the incentives and push for that themselves first as well. So the thing is, one of those doesn't work without the other. All of these need to work together. What is missing here on that is the regulation side as well, with the countries and how that puts these 3 groups under pressure with regulation on how we include something like emerging markets, as was talked about as well. So how do we get here a holistic approach of putting these things together to push forward to what we have all agreed to as necessary? So how do we get that as one thing and not separate ideas?
Okay, thanks. Who else? Yeah, please, do pass it on.
Hey, hello. So we first definitely echo on the needs for the media also to amplify in this kind of ranking of business schools, those one who are creating entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs who are creating a social impact. So giving very clear definition, first of all, of what is the impact, cannot be just too general about the ESG. So very, very much more structured. And then measure how many of the young people that are getting out of the schools become entrepreneurs and become entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs in this case. Since media sometimes like to also cover the bad news, sometimes, let's also make sure that they cover not only those who are successful, but also those who tried a social impact solution but did not make it. And why? Because often it's also because investors, and this here it goes to the second recommendation, do not invest enough into those kind of solutions. And one of the things is to reduce the ticket size of the investments on social impact. Because we see that young people, especially, if their main motivation is not the financial drive, but is the impact drive, in this case might need a little bit less to try out different solutions. To the business schools, so this is from the private sector investor side, for the business school, first of all, reinforcing the soft skills and on the values. So whenever there is entrepreneurship curricula, it's not only about become entrepreneur, but also an entrepreneurial mindset, in this case for good. So business school out to integrate that. On the governance side, for business school would be make sure that your endowment, because there are very many cases in which their endowment are also investing not properly in impactful investments. So let's also make sure that this is looked with a good eye.
Thanks very much. Who else? Yeah, one over here. So can you pass the microphone? Yeah, thank you. By the way, if you have suggestions on how to easily, effectively measure impact, would love to hear them. Please.
Hi, my name is Simon Haller. To keep it short, I focus on business schools since we covered that the most at our table. So one important element that we identified is that we, as Severin Schwan mentioned before, integrate it and make it linked to what matters in the corporate world, which means, for instance, we need to integrate figures such as ROI into finance classes, that students are able to quantify social impact, to make an assessment of what is actually measurably more impactful or less impactful, that we avoid that it becomes an esoteric topic in the end. Another one is that institutions have to walk the talk, that they first need to work also on their own climate roadmap, on their own ESG and diversity goals before they can educate someone to do it. And there is sometimes still a gap on that side. Another one on that side is also that but we now educate the students that will be the leaders of tomorrow, but we cannot wait for them to be the leaders of tomorrow to actually do what we need to do today. So we also need to make sure that the business schools and all the ecosystem understands the importance of bringing the leaders of today in this, and also that the schools educate the profs of today, because some of them were teaching these subjects over 20 years. And if they say now you have to add the slides on sustainability, some of them might just add a slide and not even integrate it in the exam, which could create wrong incentives. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes, at the back there. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha Lander. I'm the founder and CEO of Believe Partners. We focus on climate education, activation, and investments for corporations. We had a discussion here between each other, and we believe that one of the most important things from all the sides, corporations, schools, and media, is to the ability to recognize that this is, and educate that this is a business, sustainability is a business opportunity, an innovation and business opportunity. And in fact, it's one of the greatest innovations and business opportunities for humanity. And this, and especially we work a lot in the financial services industry. People still do not recognize it. It's not about legislation, regulation. It's really a business opportunity. And if we can bring that across and show that to the world and inspire that, I think we all agreed would be fantastic. So that's one thing. The second thing is also for media in particular. How can media rebuild trust to promote bold and courageous leadership? That we feel is missing as well. For innovation again, and of course the long-term value of businesses. And then the third thing, really from a corporation's perspective, is of course purpose. We heard that a couple of times as well around diversity. But really the purpose and inspiration in corporations, so that we see also the next generations coming in on that. And the last thing, coming back a little bit on regulation and legislation, we do need that push from governments as well to corporations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, over there, please.
Yeah, our table had a long discussion, but it was inspired by somebody who's been coming to these events for 20 years and said the conversation hasn't changed much. And that the critical thing that is required is a shift in government to change the climate and to actually give cover to businesses that do want to move. So a number of people here talked about businesses wanting to move but being constrained by their business colleagues. Government gives them the cover. If you have something like a climate fund, that gives resources to business schools to take these ideas forward, because I'm an academic and I'm telling you now, you pin down teaching and you pin down trying to get your research out. If somebody came to me and said you've got to do a 7-module course, I'd probably line them up in the courtyard and shoot them. So you've got to have a resource base behind this to actually get the change through. And then finally, when it comes to media, I think your idea of case studies is important. In Australia, the Financial Review has used some critical case studies to really take down leading parts of business and show that the current way of doing things just doesn't work. And I think more aggression from financial journalists could open up a lot of space to legitimate everything that we've just outlined.
Great. Thank you very much. Who hasn't spoken? Yeah, please. Anybody else? Any other tables? Don't be shy. We're amongst friends. Anybody else? No? Well, we're final offers. If not, we're sort of pretty much up to our end for the formal part of the proceedings. Drinks and cocktails will come into this room, so do please stay to discuss informally, and feel free obviously then to continue to exchange ideas, and I'm around and others. It'd be great to hear more from you. Don't hesitate to email me, andrew.jack@ft.com, if you have any follow-up. Do read the magazine, take it away please, and continue to do all the work that you all are in trying to sort of reflect and push and act in this fundamentally important area. So thank again all you for your ideas. Thanks very much to our panel. Thanks above all to Intent and the great team, and to Andre for their partnership and their effort around arranging this event and their ongoing works. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of the day and your events here at Davos.